They fired the single dad for being useless, until a five-star general called asking for him. And in that split second, the man everyone mocked went from losing his job to uncovering a truth so powerful it left his whole town stunned and speechless. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the fog as Caleb Morgan knelt beside the conveyor line, his weathered hands steady on the wrench. The familiar scent of machine oil and metal filled the air as he made the final adjustments to the bolt. His knees protested as he stood up, but he ignored the discomfort, just like he ignored the heaviness in his eyes from staying up late helping Eli with his algebra homework. Around him, the factory hummed with its usual morning rhythm, the whir of machinery, the clang of metal, and the murmur of voices. But today, those voices carried an edge of anxiety. Caleb couldn't help overhearing fragments of worried conversations about the new automated systems that kept breaking down. "Did you hear about Line 3? Whispered Mary from packaging as she passed by. "Complete shutdown yesterday. They say the robots can't handle the variable load." Caleb wiped his hands on the rough cloth of his work pants, trying not to think about how the shiny new machines in the corner stood idle, their programming glitches still unsolved. He'd offered to learn how to maintain them, had even started reading manuals at home after Eli went to bed, but so far his requests for training had gone nowhere. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor. Tommy, a young worker who often sought Caleb's advice, hurried past with an unusual tension in his shoulders. He barely met Caleb's eyes. "Morgan!" Dan Huxley's sharp voice cut through the factory noise. The supervisor stood at the entrance to his office, his pressed shirt and polished shoes a stark contrast to the workers' worn uniforms. "My office, now!" Caleb's stomach tightened, but he kept his face neutral as he made his way across the factory floor. The conversations around him died down, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. He could feel eyes following him, some sympathetic, others quickly looking away. Inside the small office, Dan didn't offer him a seat. The younger man stood behind his desk, hands planted on its surface, his expression hard. "Morgan, let's not waste time here. The company's moving forward, and frankly, you're not keeping up." The words hung in the air like smoke. Through the office window, Caleb could see workers pretending not to watch. His throat felt dry. "I'm willing to learn the new systems, Mr. Huxley. I've been studying." "Too little, too late." Dan cut him off, his voice carrying just loud enough to be heard outside. "You're too slow, too old, and let's face it, practically useless in a factory that's moving toward automation. We need people who can program robots, not dinosaurs who take all day to fix a simple conveyor belt." The casual cruelty in Dan's tone made Caleb's chest tighten. 38 years of service reduced to this moment. He thought of Eli, of the college brochures his son had been collecting, of the careful budget he maintained to keep their small household running. "I've never missed a day," Caleb said quietly. "Never been late. My work." "Your work belongs in the last century." Dan pulled out a manila envelope. "Here's your final paycheck and severance package. Clear out your locker and be gone in 30 minutes. The envelope felt heavy in Caleb's hands, weighted with more than just paper. He stood there for a moment, dignity warring with desperation. "Mr. Huxley, I have a son to support. Could we discuss?" "Discussion's over, Morgan. Security will escort you out if you're not gone in 30 minutes. Dan had already turned to his computer, dismissing Caleb's existence. The walk to his locker felt endless. Co-workers watched from behind their machines, their faces showing a mix of pity and fear. Caleb kept his head high, though his hands shook slightly as he emptied his locker of 38 years' worth of memories. Photos of Eli growing up, a coffee mug his wife had given him before she passed, a small toolbox of specialized wrenches he'd collected over the years. The drive home in his old truck was a blur. The familiar route he'd driven for decades now felt strange, as if he were seeing it through different eyes. The help wanted signs in shop windows that he'd never noticed before suddenly stood out like accusations. The truck's engine knocked in its usual spot near Miller's Creek, but today the sound seemed louder, more ominous. At home, Caleb sat in the driveway for a long moment, staring at the small house he'd worked so hard to keep. The paint was peeling in places, the garden needed weeding, but it was home. Inside, homework assignments and college brochures lay scattered on the kitchen table where he and Eli had worked late into the night. Evening came too quickly. Caleb went through the motions of making dinner, spaghetti, Eli's favorite, while his mind raced through calculations of savings and expenses. The severance package would help for a while, But after that, Eli came home from school, dropping his backpack by the door with his usual teenage clatter. "Hey, Dad, you're home early. Thought I'd get dinner started." Caleb managed to smile, stirring the sauce with more attention than it needed. "How was school?" "Pretty good. Got an A on that algebra test you helped me with." Eli grabbed plates from the cabinet, the routine familiar and comfortable. But as they sat down to eat, Caleb could feel his son's observant eyes on him. "Dad?" Eli's voice was gentle, careful. "Did something happen today?" Caleb looked up at his son's concerned face, saw the sensitivity and understanding there that reminded him so much of his late wife. The truth pressed against his chest, demanding to be spoken. But looking at Eli's hopeful college brochures on the counter, at the trust in his son's eyes, Caleb couldn't bring himself to share the burden. Not yet. "Just a long day, son," he said, forcing another smile. "Tell me more about that algebra test." Later, lying in his bed, Caleb stared at the familiar cracks in the ceiling. The house creaked and settled around him in the darkness. Down the hall he could hear Eli's soft breathing through the open door. The ceiling offered no answers, no matter how long he studied its imperfections. Tomorrow waited like a stranger in the dark, and for the first time in years, Caleb Morgan had no idea what it would bring. The pale morning light filtered through the kitchen window as Caleb measured coffee grounds into the old percolator. Each scoop felt heavier than usual, weighted down by the truth he'd have to share. The familiar aroma of brewing coffee did little to comfort him today. Down the hall, he could hear Eli getting ready for school. The soft thud of dresser drawers, the squeak of tennis shoes on worn floorboards. Caleb gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white. How could he tell his son that their already fragile world was crumbling? "Dad?" Eli's voice came from the kitchen doorway. He stood there in his blue school jacket, backpack slung over one shoulder, dark eyes studying his father's face with that perceptive gaze that sometimes made him seem older than 15. "Something's wrong. I can tell." Caleb poured 2 cups of coffee, adding extra milk to Eli's the way he liked it. His hands trembled slightly as he set them on the small kitchen table. "Sit down for a minute, son." Eli slid into his usual chair, wrapper crinkling as he opened a granola bar from his backpack. The morning silence stretched between them, broken only by the tired hum of their ancient refrigerator. Caleb's throat felt tight. He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, drawing warmth from its ceramic surface. "I lost my job yesterday. Mr. Huxley let me go." Eli's granola bar stopped halfway to his mouth. "What? But why? You're the hardest worker there." "They're automating more of the line, going digital." Caleb tried to keep his voice steady. "I guess they decided I couldn't keep up with the changes." "That's not fair," Eli's face flushed with anger. "You could learn the new stuff if they gave you a chance." "Maybe so." Caleb managed a weak smile. "But what's done is done. I'll start looking for something else today." Eli's anger faded to worry. "What about—" He hesitated, glancing at the stack of bills on the counter. "Will we be okay?" "We'll figure it out," Caleb assured him, even as his stomach knotted with uncertainty. "Don't worry about that part. You just focus on school." After Eli left for school, Caleb sat at their ancient desktop computer, the fan whirring loudly as he navigated job search websites. Each listing seemed to require skills he didn't have. Coding experience, database management, social media expertise. His fingers felt clumsy on the keyboard as he typed out applications, struggling to translate decades of hands-on work experience into the language these forms wanted. By midday, he'd switched to driving around town, his old truck rumbling between strip malls and industrial parks. The "Help Wanted" signs he remembered from his younger days had been replaced by "Apply Online" notices. At the hardware store where he'd worked summers as a teenager, the manager just shook his head apologetically. "Sorry, Caleb. Corporate handles all hiring now. Everything's through the website." The afternoon sun beat down as he walked into his 5th auto repair shop of the day. The owner, a man about his age named Mike, at least took the time to talk with him. "I wish I could help you out," Mike said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "But business is slow. Everyone's buying these new electric cars I can't even work on myself." Each rejection felt like another stone added to the weight Caleb carried. He drove home as the shadows lengthened, his mind spinning with calculations. The mortgage payment was due next week. The power bill was already late. Their savings wouldn't last long. The sound of the front door opening pulled him from his thoughts. Eli walked in, hunched slightly, his normally straight posture curved inward. How was school? Caleb asked, noticing how his son's hand lingered protectively near his ribs. Fine. Eli's response came too quickly. He turned away, but not before Caleb caught sight of the edge of a bruise peeking above his collar. Eli! Caleb stepped closer. What happened? Nothing. I'm fine. Eli's voice held a familiar strain, the same tone Caleb used when trying to protect his son from worry. Just bumped into something in gym class. Caleb wanted to press further, but the determined set of Eli's jaw told him now wasn't the time. His son disappeared into his room, leaving Caleb standing in the hallway, feeling more helpless than ever. In the kitchen, Caleb opened cabinets in the refrigerator, taking inventory. He pulled out the last package of ground beef, stretching it with extra pasta and canned tomatoes to make a meal. The overhead light flickered as he stirred the pot, reminding him of the red final notice stamp on their electric bill. While the pasta cooked, he sat at the table with their checkbook and a calculator. The numbers refused to add up to anything but despair. Even if he found a new job tomorrow, the gap between now and his first paycheck loomed like a canyon he couldn't cross. The pasta was bland, but neither of them complained. Eli pushed his food around his plate, wincing slightly when he reached for his water glass. The kitchen light flickered again, casting shifting shadows across their small table. Later, lying in his bed, Caleb stared at the familiar cracks in the ceiling. The house creaked and settled around him, sounds he usually found comforting now seeming to echo his failures. He'd promised Sarah before she died that he'd take care of their son. How could he protect Eli when he couldn't even keep the lights on? The moonlight through his window painted silver patterns on the wall, but brought no answers. Tomorrow would come too soon, bringing another day of searching, another day of trying to hide his growing fear from his son. Another day of feeling like he was letting down the two people who mattered most, his wife in memory and his son down the hall. The morning sun beat down on Caleb's neck as he gripped the rotting porch railing, testing its stability. The wood creaked ominously under his weathered hands. After 20 years of neglect, the entire railing system needed replacement, but he could only afford to patch the worst sections for now. Caleb wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, reaching for the toolbox he'd owned since his army days. The familiar weight of his hammer brought some comfort. At least he could still fix things around the house, even if the manufacturing plant didn't want him anymore. He pulled out a few nails, holding them between his lips as he positioned a support bracket. The quiet morning air filled with steady hammer strikes as Caleb worked, trying to lose himself in the familiar rhythm of repair work. Each blow helped push away thoughts of yesterday's humiliation, of Dan Huxley's sneering face, of the stack of unpaid bills on his kitchen counter. His phone buzzed in his pocket, interrupting his focus. Caleb fished it out, frowning at the unfamiliar Washington, D.C. area code. Probably another telemarketer. Still, he couldn't afford to miss any potential job opportunities. Hello, this is Caleb Morgan, he answered, keeping his voice steady despite his low expectations. Good morning, Mr. Morgan. This is Lieutenant Chen from the Office of the Joint Chiefs. Please hold for General Ellery. The crisp professional voice caught Caleb completely off guard. I'm sorry. Who did you say? Caleb's hammer slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the porch boards. 5-star General Marcus Ellery, sir. One moment, please. Before Caleb could process this, a familiar voice boomed through the phone. Caleb Morgan. Marcus Ellery here. It's been too long, my friend. Caleb sank onto the porch steps, his legs suddenly weak. General Ellery? I never expected. Still humble as ever, I see. The general's warm chuckle brought back memories of desert camps and classified briefings from decades ago. Listen, Caleb, I'll cut straight to it. We need you back. Civilian advisory capacity this time, tied to your combat engineering expertise from the classified operations in the 90s? Sir, there must be some mistake, Caleb protested weakly. I'm just a factory worker now, or was, until yesterday. No mistake, Morgan. I've been following your career since you left the service. Yesterday's events at that manufacturing plant actually accelerated my timeline for contacting you. The general's tone grew serious. What we need is your unique combination of skills, not just the technical expertise, but your ability to solve impossible problems while keeping people calm and focused. That's rare, Caleb. Always was. Caleb stared at his calloused hands, still bearing traces of factory grease despite scrubbing them raw yesterday. I'm not sure I'm qualified anymore, sir. Technology's changed so much. Stop selling yourself short, Morgan. You were the best combat engineer I ever worked with, and your interpersonal skills were even more valuable. We need both for this project." General Ellery paused. "I need you in DC for a classified briefing. How's next Tuesday? We'll handle all travel arrangements." "Tuesday?" Caleb's mind spun. "Sir, I have my son to consider." "Eli's in high school now, right? He'll be fine for a couple of days." "This is important, Caleb. National security level important." The general's voice softened. "And the compensation package is substantial. Long-term contract work that could secure Eli's college future." Caleb's throat tightened at the mention of college funds, something he'd been trying not to think about lately. "Yes, sir. Tuesday works." "Excellent. My staff will email you the details within the hour. Good to have you back, Morgan." The call ended, leaving Caleb sitting in stunned silence. The porch steps creaked beneath him as he tried to process what had just happened. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the phone, half expecting it to ring again with someone saying it was all a mistake. The contrast was staggering. Yesterday being fired as obsolete, today being called indispensable by a 5-star general. The afternoon sun had shifted significantly when Eli's footsteps approached up the walkway. Caleb looked up to see his son's concerned face. "Dad, are you okay?" Eli dropped his backpack and hurried up the steps. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Caleb managed a shaky smile. "Something like that." He patted the step beside him. "Sit down, son. There's something I need to tell you about my past. Something I've never told anyone here." Eli settled next to his father, his young face serious in the golden sunset light. "What is it?" "Before I was a factory worker, before you were born." Caleb took a deep breath. "I was a combat engineer in the Army, but not just any engineer. I worked on classified projects, operations that aren't in any public records." Eli's eyes widened. "Classified? Like secret missions?" Caleb nodded slowly. "The general who just called me, he was my commanding officer back then, and now he says they need me again, as a civilian advisor." He turned to face his son fully. "I know this is a lot to take in. It means I'll have to go to Washington next week for a briefing." "All this time," Eli shook his head in wonder. "I knew you'd been in the Army, but I never imagined." He studied his father's face with new understanding. "Is that why you never talk about those years?" The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks as father and son sat together, decades of classified silence finally breaking between them. Caleb began sharing what he could of his past, watching his son's expression shift between amazement and pride as the truth emerged at last. The old couch springs creaked as Caleb settled next to Eli in their dimly lit living room. The evening shadows stretched across the worn carpet, and the familiar ticking of their kitchen clock filled the silence. Eli sat cross-legged, turned toward his father with eager attention, his homework forgotten on the coffee table. "Dad," Eli said softly, "what exactly happened in the military? You've never really talked about it before." Caleb's hands trembled slightly as he clasped them in his lap. The memories he'd kept locked away for decades pressed against his mind, demanding to be acknowledged. He took a deep breath, stealing a glance at his son's earnest face. "It was in Iraq," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was part of a combat engineering unit. We were supposed to clear routes, make sure they were safe for our troops to travel." He paused, running a hand through his gray hair. "One day, we got word that a platoon was pinned down in a small town. The whole area was rigged with IEDs, improvised explosive devices." Eli leaned forward, his eyes wide. "Like bombs?" "Yes, son, very sophisticated ones." Caleb's voice grew stronger as the memories sharpened. "The platoon was trapped. They couldn't move forward or backward without risking those explosives. Enemy fire was coming from multiple directions." The kitchen clock continued its steady rhythm as Caleb gathered his thoughts. "I volunteered to go in, had to crawl most of the way, checking every inch of ground. The sound of gunfire was constant, but I knew if I didn't reach them." His voice trailed off. "What happened then, Dad?" Eli's question was gentle, encouraging. "I found the first device about 20 yards from their position. Had to dismantle it right there, bullets hitting the ground around me." Caleb's hands moved unconsciously, mimicking the careful movements from that day. Then another and another. Took almost 3 hours to clear a path wide enough for the platoon to evacuate. "Were you scared?" Eli asked, his voice hushed with awe. Caleb nodded slowly. "Terrified, but sometimes being brave means doing what needs to be done, even when you're scared out of your mind." "How many people did you save?" 37 men. Caleb's voice cracked slightly. "The whole platoon made it out." Eli sat in stunned silence for a moment. But why didn't you ever tell me? Why doesn't anyone know about this? The operation was classified. Plus, Caleb shrugged, his shoulders hunching slightly. I've never been one to talk about such things. It was just doing my duty, son. And General Ellery? Eli's eyes widened with sudden understanding. He was there? He was a captain then, leading that platoon. Caleb nodded, remembering the younger version of the man who'd called him today. He was the one who recommended me for a commendation, though it never made it into public records. Eli shifted on the couch, his expression changing from amazement to concern. So now he wants you to go to Washington? His voice carried a hint of worry. Are you going to have to leave? Caleb reached out and squeezed his son's shoulder. Nothing's decided yet, Eli. The general just wants to talk. That's all I know for sure. But what if... Eli hesitated, picking at a loose thread on his jeans. What if they need you again, like before? Hey, Caleb said softly, turning to face his son fully. Look at me. He waited until Eli's eyes met his. You're my priority now. Whatever happens, whatever they offer, I won't make any decisions without thinking about what's best for us, for you. Promise? Promise. Caleb pulled Eli into a tight hug, feeling his son's tension slowly release. Later that night, after helping Eli with his remaining homework and their usual bedtime routine, Caleb stood in his son's doorway. The boy was already half asleep, his face peaceful in the soft glow of his bedside lamp. Dad? Eli mumbled sleepily. Yes, son? I'm proud of you for what you did back then. His words were slightly slurred with exhaustion. You're like a real hero. Caleb's throat tightened. Get some sleep, buddy. We'll talk more tomorrow. After Eli's breathing evened out into the rhythm of sleep, Caleb made his way to the kitchen table. He pulled out the wrinkled paper where he'd hastily scribbled down the details from General Ellery's call. The Pentagon number seemed to stare back at him accusingly. Under the harsh, fluorescent kitchen light, doubt crept in. He was just a laid-off factory worker now, not the young combat engineer who'd saved those men. His hands, which had once dismantled complex explosive devices under fire, now struggled with the manufacturing plant's new computerized systems. Caleb ran his fingers over the paper, tracing the general's name. The man had sounded so confident, so sure of Caleb's abilities. But how could he be what they needed? He could barely provide for his own son, let alone serve his country again. The kitchen clock ticked away the minutes as Caleb sat there, trapped between the weight of his past accomplishments and his present insecurities. The paper with the general's information blurred slightly as exhaustion set in, but sleep felt impossibly far away. Tomorrow's uncertainty loomed large in the quiet house, while the memory of Eli's proud smile warred with the fear in his eyes at the thought of his father leaving. Morning sunlight streamed through the windshield of Caleb's old pickup truck as they drove down the familiar route to Eli's school. The truck's engine hummed steadily, providing a gentle backdrop to their quiet ride. Caleb glanced at his son, catching the slight wince that crossed Eli's face as he adjusted his backpack against the seat. You okay there, buddy? Caleb asked, his voice gentle with concern. Yeah, just slept wrong, Eli mumbled, but his eyes darted away too quickly. The school building came into view, its brick walls bathed in early morning light. Students streamed toward the entrance, their chatter and laughter drifting through the truck's open windows. As Eli reached for his backpack, Caleb noticed again how carefully his son moved. Have a good day, Caleb said, trying to keep his voice steady despite his growing worry. I love you. Love you too, Dad. Eli managed a small smile before disappearing into the crowd of students. Caleb waited until Eli was safely inside before pulling away from the curb. He parked in a quiet spot near the local park, took out his phone, and dialed the number General Ellery had left. His heart hammered as the call connected. Morgan, the general's warm voice came through clearly. I was hoping to hear from you. General Ellery, sir, I needed to know more about the position. Of course, papers rustled in the background. The role would require regular travel to various bases, typically 2 weeks per month. We'd cover all expenses, naturally. Caleb's throat tightened. 2 weeks monthly, sir? I know it's significant, Ellery acknowledged. But Caleb, this isn't just about your engineering expertise. We need someone who can teach our young officers about moral courage under pressure. Someone who leads by quiet example. Your actions in Iraq, they weren't just about technical skill. I was just doing my job, sir. No, Morgan. You showed extraordinary character that day. That's what we need now. Before Caleb could respond, his phone beeped with another incoming call. He glanced at the screen and his stomach clenched. Dan Huxley's number. "Sir, could I call you back? There's another call I should take." "Of course. Take your time considering the offer, Morgan, but not too long." Caleb switched calls, his jaw tightening. "Hello?" "Hey, old-timer," Dan's mocking voice came through. "Just checking how the job hunt's going. Found anyone willing to hire a dinosaur yet?" Caleb's free hand gripped the steering wheel. "Is there something you need, Dan?" "Just making sure you're not spreading stories about why you were let go. Wouldn't want people thinking it was anything but your own shortcomings." "I haven't said anything to anyone," Caleb replied quietly, though his chest burned with anger. "Keep it that way." The call ended abruptly. Caleb sat in silence, Dan's words echoing in his head. The phone felt heavy in his hand as he thought about General Ellery's offer. The position would mean real income, respect, purpose, but 2 weeks away from Eli each month. At home that afternoon, Caleb sorted through the mail, his hands stilled on a red-marked envelope. Inside, the utility company threatened service disconnection if the overdue balance wasn't paid within 5 days. The amount made his head spin. Evening arrived too quickly. Caleb stirred a pot of pasta, one of their cheaper meals, while Eli set the table. Steam rose from their bowls as they sat down, the kitchen quiet except for the clink of forks. "So," Caleb began carefully, "I wanted to talk about that job offer from General Ellery." Eli pushed his pasta around his bowl. "Oh, yeah? It would mean some traveling, 2 weeks each month." Caleb watched his son's face closely. "But the pay would be good, and it's important work." That's great, Dad." Eli's voice was flat, his eyes fixed on his bowl. "Eli, what's wrong? And don't tell me it's nothing. I can tell something's bothering you." His son's shoulders hunched slightly. "It's fine. Really. You should take the job if you want it." But Caleb saw the tension in his son's face, the careful way he held himself, and knew with certainty that Eli was hiding something important, something that made the prospect of his father's absence even more difficult than it should be. Caleb stood outside Eli's bedroom door, his hand hesitating over the worn wood. The hallway's single bulb cast long shadows across the faded carpet, matching the darkness that had settled in his heart. Something was wrong with his boy, and he couldn't wait any longer to find out what. He knocked softly. "Eli, can we talk?" Silence stretched for a moment before Eli's quiet voice came through. "Sure, Dad." Caleb opened the door to find Eli sitting cross-legged on his bed, a textbook open but clearly unread. The desk lamp cast a warm glow across his son's face, highlighting the worry lines that no 15-year-old should have. "Mind if I sit?" Caleb asked, gesturing to the edge of the bed. Eli nodded, closing his book and setting it aside. His shoulders hunched forward protectively, a posture Caleb had noticed more and more lately. "Son, I know something's bothering you." Caleb kept his voice gentle. "And I think it's more than just worry about my job situation. Talk to me?" Eli's fingers twisted in his bedspread, his eyes fixed downward. "It's nothing, Dad. Really. That wince when you moved your backpack this morning? That wasn't nothing." Caleb reached out, placing his weathered hand over his son's fidgeting ones. "And I've noticed the way you've been carrying yourself, like you're trying to disappear." The dam broke. Eli's lower lip trembled and tears welled in his eyes. "I didn't want to tell you," he whispered. "You've got enough to deal with." "Hey now," Caleb said, moving closer. "Nothing is more important to me than you. Nothing." Eli took a shaky breath. "It's these guys at school. They've been—" He swallowed hard. "They've been saying things, doing things." "What kind of things?" Caleb felt his stomach tighten. "They call me names because Mom was Asian, make stupid jokes." Eli's voice grew smaller. "Push me around in the hallways when teachers aren't looking." Caleb's heart cracked. "How long has this been going on?" "A few months, but it got worse after," Eli hesitated. "After they found out you lost your job." The crack in Caleb's heart widened to a chasm. "What do you mean?" "Their parents work at the plant too. They say you're—" Eli's voice caught. "They say you're useless, worthless, that we'll probably end up homeless." A sob escaped. "I tried not to listen, Dad. I tried to be strong like you." Caleb pulled his son into his arms, feeling Eli's tears soak into his shirt. His boy, his bright, kind, beautiful boy, had been carrying this weight alone, trying to protect him. "I'm so sorry, Eli," Caleb whispered, his own voice rough with emotion. "I'm so sorry you've been dealing with this by yourself." I didn't want to make things harder, Eli said between hiccups. You were already so worried about money and everything. I thought I could handle it. Look at me, Caleb said gently, pulling back to meet his son's tear-stained face. You never have to handle anything alone. That's not what family means. But you're always taking care of me, Eli protested. I wanted to be strong for you too. You are strong, Caleb said firmly. But being strong doesn't mean suffering in silence. It means having the courage to ask for help when you need it. They sat together in the quiet room, the weight of revelations settling around them. Caleb's mind raced with the implications of what he'd learned. The Pentagon job offer loomed larger now, more complicated than ever. Dad, Eli's voice was small. Are you going to take that job, the one the general offered? The question hit Caleb like a physical blow. The position would mean financial security, a chance to use his skills again, to reclaim his sense of purpose. But it would also mean leaving Eli alone for 2 weeks out of every month, alone to face the bullies, the cruel words, the physical intimidation. I don't know yet, son, Caleb answered honestly. But whatever decision I make, we'll make it together. No more carrying burdens alone, either of us. Eli nodded against his chest. I'm scared, he admitted. But I'm also proud of you. What you did in the army, saving all those people, you're not worthless, Dad. You never were. Caleb hugged his son tighter, his heart full of love and aching with the weight of the choice before him. They talked for a while longer, making plans to speak with the school administration, discussing ways to handle the bullying. When Eli finally drifted off to sleep, Caleb tucked the blanket around him just as he had when Eli was small. Later, Caleb sat alone on the front porch, listening to the chorus of frogs in the distance. The night air was cool against his face, carrying the scent of approaching autumn. Stars dotted the black Virginia sky, silent witnesses to his turmoil. Lord, he whispered into the darkness, I need your guidance now more than ever. The frogs continued their song, and Caleb sat there, a father torn between two impossible choices, praying for wisdom under the vast night sky. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting warm patches on the worn linoleum floor. Caleb stood at the stove, methodically flipping pancakes while his mind churned through possibilities. The sweet aroma of maple syrup filled the small space, a comfort he hoped would ease the difficult conversation ahead. Something smells good, Eli said, appearing in the doorway. His eyes were puffy from a night of tears, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. Thought we could use a proper breakfast. Caleb slid 2 golden brown pancakes onto a plate. Come sit with me for a minute, son. They settled at the kitchen table, the morning quiet broken only by the soft clink of forks against plates. Caleb watched his son eat, noting how Eli's shoulders still carried yesterday's weight. I've been thinking about the army position, Caleb began carefully, and about what you told me last night. Eli's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Dad, you don't have to— Yes, I do. Caleb reached across the table and squeezed his son's hand. You're my priority, Eli. Always have been, always will be, but maybe there's a way we can make this work for both of us. After breakfast, Caleb sat in his old armchair, phone in hand. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed General Ellery's number. The general answered on the second ring, his voice warm and professional. Morgan, good to hear from you. Have you made a decision? Caleb took a deep breath. Sir, I need to be honest with you about my situation. He explained everything, being a single father, Eli's struggles at school, the bullying. His voice grew stronger as he spoke, realizing that hiding his truth had never served him well. My son needs me here, sir, but I also believe in the work you're offering. Is there any way we could find a middle ground? There was a pause on the other end, and Caleb's heart sank. Then the general cleared his throat. Morgan, do you remember that night in Iraq, when you stayed behind to dismantle those IEDs? Yes, sir. You showed exceptional judgment then, knowing exactly what needed to be done and finding a way to do it. I hear that same quality in your voice now. The general's tone shifted to problem-solving mode. Let's work this out. 2 weeks in person, 2 weeks remote. We can set up secure communications at your home for the remote work. And if your son needs you, we'll make it work. Family comes first. That's not just talk in my command. Relief flooded through Caleb's chest. Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say. Say you'll be ready to start Monday. We need you, Morgan. After ending the call, Caleb found Eli in the backyard, absently shooting baskets at the old hoop. The ball bounced off the rim, and Caleb caught it. Got a minute? he asked, holding the basketball. They sat on the back steps, shoulders touching. Caleb explained the modified arrangement, 2 weeks away, 2 weeks home, with the ability to return quickly if needed. And when I'm here, I'll be working from home. We can have breakfast together, and I'll be here when you get back from school. Eli picked at a loose thread on his jeans. You really want this job, don't you? I do, Caleb admitted, but not more than I want you to be okay. We're a team, remember? They spent the next hour creating their plan. Daily video calls during the away weeks, scheduled at 7 p.m. sharp. Regular check-ins with Eli's teachers, weekend activities when Caleb was home hiking, basketball games, maybe even some road trips. They wrote it all down in Eli's notebook, making it feel official. And if those boys give you trouble, Caleb added, you call me right away. No more hiding it, okay? Eli nodded, then surprised his father with a quick hug. I'm scared, he whispered, but I'm also kind of proud of you, Dad. As evening approached, Caleb stood in his bedroom, packing for his first trip to D.C. He folded his best shirt well worn but clean and placed it carefully in the small suitcase he'd borrowed from Mrs. Peterson next door. Eli appeared in the doorway, watching. You forgot your tie, he said, holding up the navy blue one they'd bought together last Christmas. Thanks, buddy. Caleb took the tie, showing Eli how to roll it properly to prevent wrinkles. They worked together, folding clothes and checking items off the list General Ellery's office had sent. Did you pack your phone charger? Eli asked, already knowing the answer. He pulled it from the kitchen drawer where his father always left it. What would I do without you? Caleb smiled, tucking the charger into a side pocket. The suitcase slowly filled, not with much, but with enough. Caleb had always lived simply, and now that modesty felt like a strength rather than a weakness. Each item they packed represented both an ending and a beginning. When everything was ready, they stood looking at the packed suitcase, the reality of the change settling over them. Eli shifted closer to his father. Promise you'll call as soon as you get there? He asked. First thing, Caleb assured him, and every night after that. They hugged, holding on a little longer than usual. In that embrace was everything they couldn't quite say, their fears, their hopes, their love. When they pulled apart, Eli's eyes were damp, but he was smiling. Better get some sleep, Caleb said softly. Big day tomorrow. Eli nodded, turning toward his room. At the door, he paused. Dad? Yeah? I think Mom would be really proud of you right now. Caleb's throat tightened. Good night, son. The words carried them both to bed, where they lay in their separate rooms, each holding on to the quiet hope that they were making the right choice. The house creaked its familiar night sounds around them, as if reassuring them that some things would always stay the same, even as others changed. The street lamps cast long shadows across empty sidewalks as Caleb's old truck rumbled through town. At 5:30 a.m., only the baker's lights were on, warm yellow squares in the pre-dawn darkness. Eli sat quietly in the passenger seat, his breath fogging the window. You didn't have to get up this early, Caleb said softly, glancing at his son. Yeah, I did. Eli's voice was thick with sleep but determined. They pulled into the bus station parking lot, tires crunching on gravel. The station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making everything look harsh and unfamiliar. A few other travelers waited on benches, clutching coffee cups and looking bleary-eyed. Caleb hefted his suitcase from the truck bed, surprised when Eli reached for it. I've got it, Dad. They walked together to the waiting area, their footsteps echoing in the quiet morning. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily toward departure time. Neither spoke much. Everything important had already been said the night before. Got your ticket? Eli asked, breaking the silence. Caleb patted his jacket pocket. Right here. Got your house key? Yeah. Eli fingered the key hanging from his neck on a leather cord. Mrs. Peterson said she'd check on me tonight. The bus pulled in right on schedule, its diesel engine rumbling through the station. Passengers began gathering their belongings, forming a line near the door. Caleb stood, straightening his jacket. Remember, they both started at the same time, then laughed. You first, Caleb said. Remember to eat something besides coffee for breakfast. Eli tried to sound stern, just like his father did. And you remember to lock up at night, Caleb countered, pulling his son into a tight hug. I love you, buddy. Love you too, Dad. Caleb boarded the bus, finding a window seat near the middle. Eli stood on the platform, hands in his pockets, looking younger than his years. As the bus pulled away, he raised one hand in a wave. Caleb watched through the window until his son became a small figure, then disappeared entirely. The journey to DC stretched long, giving Caleb too much time to think. Fields and forests rolled past his window while doubt crept into his mind. What if he wasn't qualified enough? What if he couldn't connect with the younger soldiers? What if Eli needed him and he was too far away? He pulled out the worn photo in his wallet, himself in uniform, 20 years younger, standing proudly with his unit. The memory of that day in Iraq surfaced, the weight of responsibility, the clear purpose, the lives depending on his steady hands and calm mind. "You've done harder things," he whispered to himself, tucking the photo away. The Pentagon loomed massive and imposing as Caleb approached the visitor's entrance. His borrowed suit felt stiff, but he stood straight, shoulders back, muscle memory from his service days taking over. The security guard checked his credentials, and a young lieutenant appeared to escort him. "This way, Mr. Morgan," she said crisply. "General Ellery is expecting you." They walked through corridors that seemed endless, past offices and conference rooms. The lieutenant stopped at a heavy wooden door and knocked. "Enter!" came a commanding voice. General Marcus Ellery stood as Caleb walked in, his face breaking into a warm smile. He was older now, his hair steel gray, but his eyes held the same sharp intelligence Caleb remembered. "Morgan!" The general strode forward, clasping Caleb's hand in both of his. "It's been too long, my friend." "Sir," Caleb started formally, but Ellery waved it away. "Marcus, please. You earned that right 20 years ago." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. Tell me about your son before we get started." The simple question caught Caleb off guard. He found himself talking about Eli, his intelligence, his kindness, his recent struggles. The general listened intently, nodding. "That's exactly why we need you here," Ellery said when Caleb finished. "You understand what really matters. Come on, let me introduce you to your team." They walked to a large conference room where 12 soldiers sat waiting. Young faces looked up expectantly, some curious, others skeptical. Ellery made the introductions, emphasizing Caleb's combat experience without mentioning specific classified details. "Mr. Morgan will be leading our new resilience unit," the general announced. "His methods may be different from what you're used to, but I expect you to give him your full attention." Caleb looked at the faces before him, recognizing the shadows of stress and uncertainty he'd seen in countless others. He pulled up a chair, deliberately sitting at their level instead of standing at the front of the room. "First," he said quietly, "I'd like to hear your stories, not your service records, your real stories. What brings you here today?" The soldiers exchanged glances, unused to this approach. Finally, a sergeant named Rodriguez spoke up, describing a difficult deployment that still haunted him. Others followed, hesitantly at first, then with increasing openness. Caleb listened, really listened, the way he did with Eli. He asked gentle but probing questions about their choices, their values, their struggles with right and wrong. By lunchtime, the initial skepticism had melted into engaged discussion. "Tomorrow," he told them, "we'll talk about moral courage, not just in combat, but in daily choices. It's the foundation of everything else." That evening, Caleb sat on the edge of his hotel bed, phone in hand. The room was basic but clean, with a view of the city lights. He dialed home, heart lifting when Eli answered on the first ring. "Dad, how was it? Did you meet the general? What's the Pentagon like?" "Slow down," Caleb chuckled. "It was good, different but good. The general remembered everything, just like he said. He heard something in Eli's voice, though, a slight strain. 'How are you doing, buddy?' 'Really?' There was a pause. 'I'm okay, just the house feels weird without you here.' 'I know,' Caleb's chest tightened, 'but I'll be home before you know it. 2 weeks will go fast.' 'Yeah,' Eli's voice brightened slightly. 'Mrs. Peterson brought over lasagna, and I did all my homework.' 'That's my boy.' Caleb glanced at the clock. 'Get some sleep, okay? I'll call tomorrow night, same time.' 'Promise?' 'Promise. Love you, son.' 'Love you too, Dad.' Caleb held the phone for a moment after hanging up, listening to the unfamiliar city sounds outside his window. His son's loneliness echoed in his heart, but alongside it was a growing sense of purpose. He had to make these weeks count for both of them. Morning light filtered through the Pentagon's windows as Caleb arranged chairs in a circle for his second day of training. The formal conference room setup hadn't felt right, too much like a classroom, too rigid for the kind of connection he wanted to build. A young sergeant named Rodriguez was the first to arrive, eyebrows rising at the changed layout. "Morning, sir. This is different." "Just Caleb," he reminded gently, gesturing to a chair. "And sometimes, different is what we need." The other soldiers trickled in, some exchanging uncertain glances at the informal arrangement. When everyone was seated, Caleb took his own chair, deliberately placing himself at the same level as the group. "Yesterday you shared your stories," he began softly. "Today I want to talk about what those stories mean, not just what happened, but how it changed you." Lieutenant Chen shifted uncomfortably. "With all due respect, sir. Caleb, we've had sensitivity training before. It doesn't help much." "This isn't sensitivity training," Caleb replied. "This is about understanding that strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about knowing how to put yourself back together." He reached down and pulled out his old combat boots from under his chair, setting them in the center of the circle. The leather was worn, scarred with desert sand and memories. "These were on my feet in Iraq, the day we lost Martinez." His voice stayed steady, but his hands trembled slightly. "I can still hear the click when I stepped on that pressure plate. Still feel the weight of knowing one wrong move would kill not just me, but everyone behind me." The room grew very quiet. Several soldiers leaned forward, recognition in their eyes. "We're taught to compartmentalize," Caleb continued. "Lock it away and move forward. But those boxes we put things in, they leak, and pretending they don't just makes the cracks bigger." For the next 3 hours, the circle became a space of raw honesty. Sergeant Williams spoke about the nightmares that kept him from sleeping. Corporal Torres admitted she couldn't handle crowds anymore. Lieutenant Chen revealed he hadn't spoken to his family in months, ashamed of his anger issues. Caleb listened, guided, and shared his own struggles. By lunchtime, the rigid military postures had softened. Several soldiers lingered afterward, asking questions or just wanting to talk more. Meanwhile, back in Virginia, Eli walked into the local Veterans Center after school. The old building smelled of coffee and wood polish, with faded flags hanging on the walls. A few older men sat playing cards, while others worked on a puzzle near the window. "Can I help you, son?" asked a gray-haired man with kind eyes, introducing himself as Frank. "I'm Eli Morgan. I'd like to volunteer, if that's okay." Frank's eyes lit up with recognition. "Morgan? Any relation to Caleb Morgan?" "He's my dad," Eli said, surprised. "Did you know him?" "Know him? Come sit down, boy. Let me tell you about combat engineers." For the next hour, Eli listened as Frank and other veterans shared stories about the crucial role combat engineers played. They spoke of cleared minefields, rebuilt bridges, and lives saved through quick thinking and steady hands. "Your father's generation," Frank explained, "they were something special, had to think fast and work slow at the same time. One mistake could cost dozens of lives." Another veteran, Bill, nodded. "Combat engineers were our guardian angels. We couldn't move without them clearing the way first." Eli helped sort donated supplies as they talked, feeling a growing pride in his father's service. The veterans treated him like family, sharing snacks and asking about school. "Come back any time," Frank said as Eli prepared to leave. "We could use young hands around here." When Saturday arrived, Caleb's return brought warm hugs and happy tears. Sunday morning found father and son on their porch, tools spread around them as they worked on loose boards and wobbly railings. "Hand me that Phillips head?" Caleb asked, pointing to the screwdriver. Eli passed it over. "Dad, I've been volunteering at the Veterans Center." Caleb paused his work, looking at his son with surprise. "They told me about combat engineers," Eli continued, hammering a nail with careful strikes, "about how important you are." "They're good men down there," Caleb said softly. "Been thinking of visiting myself." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of their tools creating a peaceful melody. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and fresh wood. "I'm proud of you, Dad," Eli said suddenly, "not just for the army stuff, for everything." Caleb had to blink back tears, focusing on the board he was replacing. "I'm proud of you too, son. More than you know." As evening approached, they sat on their newly repaired porch, sharing hot cocoa in their favorite mugs. Steam rose in the cooling air as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Tell me about DC," Eli said, pulling his knees up to his chest. Caleb described the training sessions, careful to respect confidentiality but sharing the impact of connection and understanding. Eli listened intently, asking thoughtful questions. "It's like what you did for me," Eli observed. "Listening, really listening." Caleb smiled, wrapping an arm around his son's shoulders. They sat together as stars began appearing in the darkening sky, their cocoa warming their hands, their hearts feeling closer than they had in years. Monday morning arrived with a golden sunrise painting the Morgans' modest kitchen in warm light. Caleb stood by the front door, his small duffel bag packed for another week in Washington. The weight of leaving felt different this time, lighter somehow, though still significant. Eli emerged from his room wearing his favorite blue hoodie, his dark hair still slightly messy from sleep. "Did you pack your phone charger this time, Dad?" he asked with a gentle smirk, referring to last week's forgotten essential. "Right here." Caleb patted his jacket pocket, managing a smile. "And extra socks, too." They shared a quiet breakfast of toast and eggs, the kitchen clock ticking steadily in the background. Caleb noticed Eli seemed more at ease than during his first departure, though concern still lingered in his son's eyes. "Remember what we agreed on?" Caleb asked, rinsing their plates. "Call every night at 8, Eli nodded. "And I'll stay at the Veterans Center until 6 when Mrs. Thompson can drive me home." They embraced by the door, Caleb holding his son tight. "I'm proud of you, buddy. So proud." The bus ride to DC passed quickly this time, Caleb reviewing his notes for the upcoming sessions. The Pentagon's imposing structure no longer intimidated him as it had the week before. Familiar faces greeted him in the hallways, offering respectful nods. In the training room, Caleb's approach continued to evolve. He arranged chairs in a circle rather than rows, creating an environment of equality and openness. The soldiers, initially resistant to this informal setup, gradually relaxed as Caleb shared stories from his own experiences. "Leadership isn't about having all the answers," he explained, his quiet voice carrying conviction. "It's about having the courage to face the questions together." During a particularly powerful session on Wednesday, Caleb spoke about integrity during combat situations. A young lieutenant had her phone out, discreetly recording as Caleb described the moment he'd chosen to stay behind to disarm explosives while others evacuated. "We don't make these choices for recognition," he said, his words resonating deeply. "We make them because they're right, because sometimes being human means standing firm when everything inside you wants to run." The video spread through internal channels, reaching commanders and staff across different divisions. General Ellery watched it in his office, a proud smile crossing his face. He made several calls that afternoon. On Thursday morning, Caleb arrived to find the training room transformed. A small podium stood at the front, and several high-ranking officers lined the walls. General Ellery stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "Staff Sergeant Morgan," he announced formally, using Caleb's old rank. "Your actions 20 years ago saved 16 lives, including my own. Today, we acknowledge that courage officially." Caleb stood awkwardly as Ellery presented him with a civilian service medal, his hands trembling slightly as he accepted it. The room erupted in applause, but it was the genuine respect in the soldier's eyes that moved him most deeply. Back home, Eli navigated his school days with growing confidence. His time at the Veterans Center had given him a new perspective on strength. It wasn't about confrontation, but resilience. Still, he carefully planned his routes between classes, avoiding the gym corridor where the worst bullying had occurred. During lunch breaks, he'd find quiet spots to read the texts his father sent, simple messages about the day's activities, or gentle reminders to stay strong. Each one made him stand a little taller. Thursday evening found Caleb in his hotel room, the service medal resting on the bedside table. He dialed home at exactly 8 o'clock, smiling when Eli answered on the first ring. "Hey Dad, how was today?" Caleb described the ceremony briefly, downplaying its significance as he always did, but Eli caught the emotion in his voice. "That's amazing, Dad. Really amazing. I wish I could have seen it." "How about you, buddy? How's school?" "Better," Eli said, and Caleb could hear the truth in it. "The veterans at the center taught me this cool breathing technique for when I'm stressed. And Mr. Martinez showed me pictures from when he was a combat engineer too." They talked for nearly an hour, their conversation flowing easier than ever before. As they prepared to say goodnight, Eli's voice grew serious. "Dad, I want you to know I'm proud of you, for everything." Caleb sat back in his hotel chair, emotion welling up in his throat. Through the window, the Capitol's lights twinkled like stars, and for the first time in years, the future felt bright with possibility. "Thanks, son," he managed. "That means more than any medal ever could." After hanging up, Caleb stood at the window, watching the city below. The past weeks had brought changes he never expected, not just in his work, but in his relationship with Eli, in his sense of purpose. Where there had been uncertainty, hope now grew stronger each day. He picked up the service medal, running his thumb over its surface. The recognition felt good, but Eli's words echoed in his mind. worth more than any official honor. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Caleb Morgan felt truly hopeful for what lay ahead. Caleb stood before the mirror in his hotel room, adjusting the collar of his best blue dress shirt. His weathered hands smoothed down the fabric, pausing over his heart where his old service medals would soon be pinned. Through the reflection, he watched Eli sprawled on the hotel bed, already dressed in his Sunday best, typing excitedly on his phone. "The guys at the Veterans Center are so excited, Dad," Eli said, grinning. "Mr. Jenkins and the whole crew made it to D.C. They're waiting in the Pentagon lobby right now." Caleb's throat tightened with emotion. The veterans had pooled their resources to make the trip, refusing to miss his moment of recognition. "Those old troublemakers," he said softly, his voice rough with gratitude. The ceremony room at the Pentagon buzzed with activity. Rows of chairs filled with soldiers in dress uniforms, their brass buttons gleaming under the lights. General Ellery stood at the podium, his 5 stars catching the light as he described the classified mission from decades ago. When their platoon was pinned down by enemy fire, the general's voice carried clear and strong. Combat Engineer Morgan crawled through active combat to disarm multiple explosive devices. His actions that day saved 37 American lives, including my own. Caleb felt Eli's hand slip into his, squeezing tight. In the front row, the veterans from their hometown sat tall and proud, Mr. Jenkins dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. "It is my great honor," General Ellery continued, "to finally present Combat Engineer Caleb Morgan with the Distinguished Service Cross, recognizing his exceptional valor in the face of extreme danger." The room erupted in applause as Caleb walked forward. His steps were steady, but his heart thundered in his chest. As the general pinned the medal to his chest, Caleb saw tears in the older man's eyes. "Thank you for giving me the chance to make this right, old friend," General Ellery whispered. When Caleb returned to his seat, Eli hugged him fiercely. "I'm so proud of you, Dad," he whispered. The veterans surrounded them after the ceremony, sharing handshakes and emotional embraces. The drive home that evening was filled with quiet joy. Eli couldn't stop touching the medal, carefully preserved in its velvet box. They stopped at a rest area just outside their hometown, the sky darkening toward dusk. "I'll be quick," Eli said, heading for the restroom while Caleb filled the truck with gas. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Unease crept into Caleb's stomach. "Eli?" he called out, walking toward the restroom building. No answer. A muffled cry came from behind the building. Caleb broke into a run, his dress shoes slapping against the concrete. He rounded the corner to find 4 teenage boys surrounding Eli, who lay crumpled on the ground. "Not so special now, are you?" one of them sneered, delivering another kick to Eli's ribs. "Your old man might be some big shot, but you're still nothing." "Get away from my son!" Caleb's voice boomed across the parking lot. The boys scattered like startled deer, but the damage was done. Eli's face was bloody, his new dress shirt torn. When he tried to stand, he swayed dangerously. "Dad," he mumbled, "I don't feel so good." His eyes rolled back as he collapsed. Caleb caught him before he hit the ground, his heart racing with terror. He gathered Eli in his arms, this precious boy who seemed suddenly so small, and ran for the truck. The nearest hospital was 15 minutes away. He made it in 10. The emergency room lights were harsh and unforgiving as doctors whisked Eli away for examination. Caleb paced the waiting room, his metal box clutched forgotten in his hands, prayer after desperate prayer falling from his lips. Finally, a doctor approached. "Your son has a concussion," she said gently. "There's some bruising to his ribs, but thankfully no breaks. We'd like to keep him overnight for observation." Caleb sank into the chair beside Eli's hospital bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his son's chest. Eli's face was swollen, dark bruises blooming across his cheekbone. The victory of the day's ceremony felt like ashes in Caleb's mouth. His phone buzzed with an email notification. With trembling hands, he opened it to find a message from Pentagon HR. "Dear Mr. Morgan, we regret to inform you that your contract has been temporarily suspended pending review. Recent events suggest potential difficulties in maintaining the commitment level required for our training program. We will reassess the situation once your personal matters are resolved. Regards, Department of Defense Human Resources." Caleb's vision blurred with tears. The metal box slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor. Everything he'd worked to rebuild, his dignity, his purpose, their financial security, seemed to crumble around him. He reached for Eli's hand, careful of the IV line, and bowed his head. In the sterile hospital room, under the humming fluorescent lights, Caleb Morgan faced his darkest hour. His son lay injured because of his success, and the very recognition he'd received had somehow made them more vulnerable. The weight of failure pressed down on his shoulders, heavier than any metal. Morning sunlight filtered through the thin hospital curtains, casting pale shadows across Eli's bruised face. Caleb hadn't moved from the plastic chair all night, his back stiff and his heart heavier than the machinery beeping steadily beside the bed. He watched as Eli's eyes fluttered open, wincing at the brightness. "Hey, kiddo," Caleb said softly, leaning forward. His hand found Eli's, careful to avoid the IV line. "How's the pain?" Eli tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "Like I got hit by a truck, but I'm okay, Dad. Really." Caleb's throat tightened. The bruises on his son's face had darkened overnight, purple and angry against his pale skin. The doctor had explained the concussion symptoms they needed to watch for, but all Caleb could focus on was how small and vulnerable Eli looked in the hospital bed. "This is my fault," Caleb whispered, more to himself than to Eli. "If I hadn't been away so much, if I'd been there to protect you—" "Dad, stop." Eli's voice was quiet but firm. "You can't be everywhere at once. Those guys, they would have found another time, another place." A nurse came in to check Eli's vitals, her cheerful efficiency a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere in the room. While she worked, Caleb stepped into the hallway and pulled out his phone. He'd been dreading this call, but he couldn't put it off any longer. General Ellery answered on the second ring. "Caleb, how's Eli?" "He's awake. Sore, but the doctors say he'll recover." Caleb's voice cracked slightly. "Sir, I need to tell you." "I already know about the suspension notice," Ellery interrupted, his tone gentle. "It's just procedure, Caleb. We'll fight it." "With all due respect, sir, maybe they're right. Maybe I can't do this job and be the father Eli needs." There was a long pause on the other end. "This isn't just about you anymore, Caleb. The work you're doing is changing lives, but I understand if you need time. The review process will take a few weeks at least. Take care of your boy first." After hanging up, Caleb returned to find the nurse helping Eli sit up. They spent the next hour going through discharge paperwork and listening to care instructions. Caleb memorized every detail about concussion monitoring, determined not to miss anything else that could harm his son. The drive home was silent, each bump in the road making Eli wince despite Caleb's careful driving. Their small house looked different somehow as they pulled up, more fragile, less safe than before. Caleb parked as close to the porch as possible. "Let me help you with those steps," he said, hurrying around to Eli's side of the truck. Eli accepted the support without argument, something that worried Caleb more than any complaint would have. They made their way up the worn wooden steps slowly, Caleb's arms steady around his son's shoulders. Inside, Caleb got Eli settled on the couch with pillows and his favorite blanket. The house felt too quiet, too empty. The stack of training materials from the Pentagon sat untouched on the kitchen table, mocking him with their importance. "Do you need anything?" Caleb asked, hovering nearby. "Water? Something to eat?" "I'm okay, Dad. Just tired." Eli's eyes were already drooping. "You don't have to stand guard. I'm not going anywhere." Caleb nodded, but couldn't bring himself to move far. He spent the afternoon watching Eli doze, checking on him regularly, and ignoring the mounting emails on his phone. With each passing hour, his resolve to quit the army position grew stronger. What good was helping other soldiers if he couldn't even protect his own son? As evening approached, Eli insisted on trying to eat something. Caleb made soup, but barely touched his own bowl. After making sure Eli was comfortable in bed, he found himself drawn to the front porch, just as he had been on so many difficult nights before. The wooden boards creaked under his feet as he lowered himself into the old rocking chair. In the distance, frogs called to each other in the gathering darkness, their familiar chorus unchanged by the day's events. The sound transported him back to other nights spent here, wrestling with decisions, praying for guidance. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the weight of failure pressed down on him like a physical thing. He'd tried to reach for something more, to be more than just a laid-off factory worker, and his son had paid the price. The frogs continued their song, indifferent to his pain, while Caleb sat alone with his defeat. He stared out into the darkness, seeing nothing but his own shortcomings reflected back at him. The Pentagon ID badge in his pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Everything he'd built over the past weeks, the respect, the purpose, the pride in Eli's eyes when he talked about his father's work, seemed to crumble like sand between his fingers. A soft breeze stirred the trees, carrying with it the same questions that had plagued him since losing his factory job. But now, instead of wondering if he could succeed, he questioned whether he should even try. The porch light cast weak, yellow shadows around him as he sat, surrounded by the symphony of frogs and his own crushing sense of defeat. The morning sun crept through the windows of the Morgan house as Caleb stirred a pot of oatmeal on the stove. He'd added extra cinnamon and brown sugar, Eli's favorite, hoping to coax a smile from his son. The house felt unusually quiet, broken only by the soft bubbling of cooking oatmeal and the occasional creak of floorboards upstairs where Eli slept. Caleb's hands trembled slightly as he measured out honey. The bruises on Eli's face haunted him, each one a reminder of his absence when his son needed him most. Dark circles hung under his own eyes from another sleepless night spent listening for any sound of distress from Eli's room. A knock at the front door startled him. Caleb turned down the heat on the stove and walked cautiously to answer it, unsure who would visit so early. When he opened the door, he found himself facing 5 familiar faces from the Veterans Center. Mike, the former combat medic with his signature red cap. Tom, who walked with a slight limp. Sarah, who'd served as a logistics coordinator. And brothers James and Pete, both former infantrymen. "Morning, Caleb," Mike said softly, holding up 2 full grocery bags. "Thought you might need some supplies." "We heard about Eli," Sarah added, her kind eyes full of concern. She carried another bag filled with fresh fruit and vegetables. Caleb's throat tightened as he stepped back to let them in. "You didn't have to—" "Yes, we did," Tom interrupted firmly, limping past with more groceries. "That's what family does." The veterans moved efficiently through Caleb's kitchen, putting away groceries and taking stock of what else might be needed. James noticed the oatmeal starting to bubble and quietly adjusted the heat, while Pete pulled out extra bowls in case Eli woke up hungry. "Sit down, Caleb," Sarah insisted, guiding him to a kitchen chair. "You look dead on your feet." Mike pulled up another chair across from Caleb. "Remember that time in Baghdad when our whole unit got pinned down by that sniper?" he asked, his voice carrying across the kitchen. "We were stuck there for hours until this guy," he gestured at Caleb, "figured out how to get us all to safety without losing a single person." Tom nodded, leaning against the counter. "That wasn't in your classified files, was it? But we remember. Just like we remember how you taught the newer guys to spot IEDs, saving God knows how many lives." "You never wanted credit," Sarah added, placing a steaming cup of coffee in front of Caleb. "But those soldiers went home to their families because of you. Those families got to keep their fathers, their sons, their brothers. All because you cared more about doing right than getting recognition." Caleb stared into his coffee cup, his vision blurring slightly. "That was a lifetime ago. Now I can't even protect my own son." "Bull," James said firmly. "You're protecting him by showing him how to stand up again after getting knocked down. That's what you taught all of us." The phone rang, interrupting the conversation. Caleb checked the caller ID. It was General Ellery. "Take it," Pete encouraged. "We'll keep an eye on things." Caleb stepped into the living room, answering the phone with a tired, "Hello, sir." "Drop the sir, Caleb," General Ellery's warm voice came through. "This isn't an official call. This is Marcus checking on his friend." "I'm thinking of quitting the program," Caleb admitted quietly. "Eli needs me here." "Listen to me," Marcus said, his tone gentle but firm. "Remember what you told that young lieutenant in Fallujah? The one who froze up after losing 2 men? You said leadership isn't about never falling. It's about how you get back up and help others rise with you." Caleb sank into his armchair, remembering that day clearly now. That was different. "No, it wasn't," Marcus insisted. "You're facing the same choice now. You can retreat or you can show Eli and everyone else how to face hardship with dignity and courage. That's why we need you in this program. Not just for your engineering skills, but for moments exactly like this." From the kitchen, Caleb could hear the veterans talking quietly amongst themselves, their presence filling his home with warmth he hadn't realized he'd been missing. The smell of coffee and oatmeal wafted through the air, making the house feel more like home than it had in days. "The whole town's talking about what happened to Eli," Marcus continued. "People are angry, not at you, but at the bullies in the system that let this happen. You've got more support than you know." As if confirming his words, Caleb heard a car door outside. Through the window, he saw Mrs. Henderson from across the street walking up his driveway with what looked like a homemade casserole. "I don't know what to do next," Caleb admitted. "Yes, you do," Marcus replied. "You do what you've always done. You get up, you face it head on, and you help others do the same. That's who you are, Caleb. That's who you've always been. After ending the call, Caleb returned to the kitchen where the veterans had been joined by Mrs. Henderson and two other neighbors. They moved around his kitchen with purpose, organizing meals, discussing plans to help with Eli's schoolwork while he recovered, and sharing stories that reminded Caleb of who he was beyond his current struggles. Standing in his living room, watching these people who refused to let him face this alone, Caleb felt something shift inside him. The weight of the past few days didn't disappear, but it became more bearable. These weren't just visitors bringing groceries. They were warriors who understood sacrifice, parents who knew the fear of failing their children, neighbors who believed in community. For the first time since Eli's attack, Caleb didn't feel like he was drowning. The support surrounding him wasn't just about groceries or casseroles. It was about reminding him that he wasn't alone in this fight. These people, who had seen him at his best and now refused to abandon him at what felt like his worst, stood as living proof that the values he'd fought for still mattered. The old pickup truck rumbled down Main Street as Caleb drove Eli to his follow-up appointment. Eli sat quietly in the passenger seat, his bruised face partially hidden beneath the brim of his baseball cap. Every few minutes Caleb glanced over, his heart aching at the sight of his son's injuries. "How's the headache today?" Caleb asked softly, slowing for a red light. "A little better," Eli replied, though his wincing told a different story. "The light still bothers my eyes some." The medical center came into view, its brick facade warm in the afternoon sun. As Caleb helped Eli from the truck, his phone buzzed. Principal Hartman's name flashed across the screen. "Mr. Morgan," she said when he answered, her voice carrying an unusual note of concern. "Could you come by the school after Eli's appointment? There have been some developments we need to discuss." Inside the medical center, Dr. Chen examined Eli carefully, checking his pupils and asking about his symptoms. "The concussion is healing," she said, making notes in his chart. "But you'll need to take it easy for at least another week. No screens, no reading for long periods." Eli nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly at the news. After the appointment, they drove to the high school. The hallways were empty and quiet, their footsteps echoing against the lockers. Principal Hartman met them at her office door, her usual stern expression softened with genuine concern. "Please come in," she said, gesturing to the chairs across from her desk. "First, Eli, how are you feeling?" "I'm okay," Eli mumbled, settling carefully into his seat. Principal Hartman folded her hands on her desk. "Mr. Morgan, I want you to know, we take what happened very seriously. The community outrage has been significant and justified. We've identified the students responsible for attacking Eli." Caleb straightened in his chair. "You have?" "Yes. Security footage from the rest stop, plus several witness statements, gave us clear evidence. The 3 boys involved have been suspended pending further investigation. Their parents have been notified, and the police are involved now." She pulled out a folder. "We're implementing mandatory counseling for the offenders, and they'll face serious consequences for their actions. Additionally, we're reviewing our anti-bullying policies and increasing staff training." Eli spoke up quietly. What about when I come back?" Principal Hartman's expression softened further. "We're putting additional safety measures in place, Eli. You'll have a faculty mentor you can go to any time, and we're arranging your schedule to minimize contact with these students." As they discussed the details, Caleb's phone kept buzzing with text messages. He checked quickly during a pause. Parents from the school were organizing meals, offering to help with yard work, even starting a fund to help with medical expenses. "The community support has been remarkable," Principal Hartman noted, seeing Caleb's surprise. "People here care about you both, Mr. Morgan. They're angry this happened, and they want to help." Caleb felt his throat tighten. We appreciate that." After the meeting, they walked slowly back to the truck. Eli seemed lighter somehow, as if knowing the bullies would face consequences had lifted a weight from his shoulders. "Dad," he said as they pulled out of the parking lot, I think things might be okay." Caleb reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder gently. "I think you might be right, buddy." When they turned onto their street, Caleb noticed something on their front porch. As they got closer, he could make out several covered dishes and what looked like cards propped against them. They parked, and Caleb helped Eli up the steps. There were 3 ceramic casserole dishes, still warm to the touch, and a stack of handwritten cards. The top one read, "Morgan family, you're not alone. We've got your backs." Caleb picked up one of the dishes, breathing in the smell of home-cooked food. His vision blurred slightly as he read the notes attached to each container. Chicken and rice casserole from the Hendersons, lasagna from the Williams family, apple pie from Mrs. Chen at the corner store. The cards were filled with messages of support, offers of help, and words of encouragement. One included a gift card for groceries. Another had a check to help with medical expenses. Eli picked up one of the cards, reading it slowly. "Dad, look at this one." The card was from Tommy, a quiet kid in Eli's class. "Eli, I'm sorry I didn't speak up before when I saw what was happening. That won't happen again. You've got friends here. We just haven't been good at showing it." Standing there on the porch, surrounded by tangible evidence of their community's care, Caleb felt something shift inside him. The crushing weight of trying to handle everything alone began to lift. Hope, fragile but persistent, stirred in his chest. "Let's get these inside," he said softly, gathering up the dishes. "Looks like we won't have to cook tonight." Eli managed a small smile, carefully collecting the cards. Together, they carried the gifts of food and friendship into their home, where the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, warming the kitchen with golden light. The morning sun cast long shadows across the backyard as Eli carefully walked along the worn path between the garden beds. His steps were slower than usual, but steadier than they had been 2 days ago. The bruises on his face had begun to fade from dark purple to lighter shades of blue and green. Caleb watched from the kitchen window while his laptop booted up, his coffee growing cold beside the keyboard. He'd received an urgent email from General Ellery's office requesting a video call at 9 sharp. The notification light on his screen blinked, indicating the meeting was about to begin. "Eli!" Caleb called through the screen door. "I need to take this call. You okay out there?" "I'm good, Dad," Eli answered, lowering himself onto the wooden bench near the tomato plants. "Mrs. Henderson's cat is keeping me company." The orange tabby had indeed taken up residence next to Eli, purring contentedly as the boy gently scratched behind its ears. Caleb smiled at the sight before turning his attention to the computer. General Ellery's face appeared on screen, his usual commanding presence somehow managing to convey itself even through the digital connection. "Caleb," he said warmly, "you're looking better than when we last spoke." "Thank you, sir," Caleb replied, straightening instinctively. "We both are." "I can see Eli in the background there," the general noted, his expression softening. "How's he doing?" "Getting stronger every day. The community's been—" Caleb paused, still overwhelmed by the support they'd received. "They've been incredible." "That's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you, Caleb." The general leaned forward, his face filling more of the screen. "The review board has completed their evaluation of your situation, but before I share their decision, I want you to know something. What happened with Eli wasn't a mark against you. If anything, it highlighted exactly why we need you." Caleb's hands tightened around his coffee mug. "Sir? The way you handled the crisis, with dignity, strength, and by allowing others to help, that's the kind of leadership we're trying to teach. The board has not only reinstated you, Caleb, they're promoting you." The mug nearly slipped from Caleb's grasp. "Promoting? We want you to lead a national moral leadership initiative. Your work with the Resilience Unit has already shown remarkable results. But more than that, your personal example, as a father, as a veteran, as someone who faces adversity with grace, that's what we need to share on a broader scale." Through the window, Caleb could see Eli reading one of the Get Well cards that had arrived that morning. The sight grounded him, reminded him of what mattered most. "Sir, I'm honored, but—" Caleb chose his words carefully. "I need to be sure this works for Eli. He has to be my priority." The general nodded approvingly. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Caleb. The position comes with flexibility. You'll have more control over your schedule, and we can arrange for most of your work to be done remotely. When travel is necessary, we'll plan it well in advance." What exactly would the role entail? You'd be developing training programs, speaking at military installations, and working with units to implement the relationship-based leadership methods you've been using. We want to transform how the military approaches mental health and moral resilience. Caleb stood up from his chair, moving to the door. "Eli, can you come in for a minute, son?" Eli carefully rose from the bench, the cat following at his heels as he made his way inside. He stood beside his father's chair, offering a respectful nod to the general on screen. "The Army's offered me a new position," Caleb explained, watching his son's reaction closely. "It would mean continuing the work we started, but on a larger scale. I'd be home more than before, but there would still be some travel involved. I want to know how you feel about that." Eli was quiet for a moment, his hand absently stroking the cat that had wound itself around his legs. "Would you be helping other soldiers, like the ones at the Veterans Center?" "Yes," Caleb replied, "teaching them about resilience, about handling tough situations." A small smile crossed Eli's face. "Like you taught me?" When Caleb nodded, Eli continued, "Then you should do it, Dad. I've learned a lot watching you these past weeks, about not giving up, about letting people help sometimes. Maybe other people need to learn that too." General Ellery's voice came through the speakers, gentle but firm. "Your fathers taught us all something about strength, Eli. Real strength isn't about facing everything alone. It's about knowing when to stand firm and when to lean on others." Caleb felt pride swell in his chest, not from the general's words, but from the quiet confidence he saw in his son's eyes. "Are you sure about this, Eli? We'd need to make some changes, set up a better system than before." "I'm sure, Dad." Eli's voice was stronger than it had been in days. "Besides, we've got help now. Real help." The general cleared his throat. "Take the weekend to discuss the details, Caleb. Call me Monday with your decision." After ending the call, Caleb and Eli moved to the kitchen table. They grabbed a notepad and began mapping out how their new life might look. Eli suggested using a shared calendar app one of his teachers had recommended. Caleb added notes about emergency contacts and backup plans. "We should talk to Mrs. Henderson," Eli said, writing carefully. "She already said she'd be happy to check on me when you're away, and Mr. Rodriguez from the Veterans Center offered to help with rides to school." Caleb watched his son planning and problem-solving, seeing not the injured boy from days ago, but a young man growing stronger through adversity. "When did you get so wise?" Eli looked up, meeting his father's gaze. "I had a good teacher." He pushed the notepad across the table. "Look, if we schedule your training sessions for when I have after-school activities and plan the trips around school breaks." They spent the next hour working out the details, their heads bent together over the paper, adding ideas and refining plans. The morning sun climbed higher, filling the kitchen with warm light, while outside, the community they'd come to trust went about their day, present, protective, and proud of the two Morgan men who had shown them all what real strength looked like. The familiar corridors of the Pentagon felt different this Monday morning. Caleb adjusted his tie, a new one Eli had helped him pick out, as he walked toward the conference room. His footsteps echoed against the polished floors, but the sound was soon drowned out by excited voices. "Mr. Morgan!" Lieutenant Sarah Chen spotted him first, her face lighting up. She hurried forward, followed by several other soldiers from his training group. "We've been waiting for you, sir." Caleb felt warmth spread through his chest as the young officers gathered around him. These weren't just trainees anymore. They were people who had shared their struggles, their hopes, and their commitment to becoming better leaders. "The room's all set up," Sergeant Mike Torres said, gesturing toward their usual meeting space. "We've got coffee, too. The good kind this time, not that break room stuff." Inside the conference room, more familiar faces greeted him. The whiteboard was already filled with ideas and suggestions they'd been working on in his absence. Someone had written Morgan's Method at the top in bold letters. "We kept the momentum going while you were away," Captain David Wright explained, handing Caleb a thick folder. "Everyone contributed their experiences from implementing your techniques. The results have been incredible." Caleb opened the folder, finding detailed accounts from various units. Stories of soldiers opening up about their struggles, of officers learning to lead with empathy without sacrificing discipline, of teams growing stronger through shared vulnerability. "This is outstanding work," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I think we need a different name than Morgan's Method." He walked to the board and erased his name, replacing it with Resilience Through Connection. The group nodded in approval, and they dove into work. Caleb pulled out his laptop, opening the framework he'd been developing at home. The curriculum was taking shape. Modules on moral courage, exercises in empathetic leadership, practical scenarios that challenged conventional thinking about strength. "The key," Caleb explained, standing before the group, "is understanding that true resilience isn't built in isolation. It's forged through relationships, through trust, through the courage to be vulnerable and the wisdom to support others." As they worked through the morning, Caleb's phone buzzed with a text from Eli. "First day back at school, Mrs. Henderson made me lunch, starting my journal project about resilience. Miss you, Dad." Caleb smiled, typing back, "Proud of you, son. Call tonight?" The response came quickly. "You bet. Got lots to tell you." The day progressed with a natural rhythm. Caleb moved between brainstorming sessions, curriculum development, and meetings with senior staff. His approach was resonating beyond the initial training group. Officers from other departments stopped by to observe, taking notes and asking questions. During lunch, Lieutenant Chen shared how she'd used Caleb's techniques with her platoon. "One of my soldiers was struggling with anxiety," she explained. "Instead of pushing him harder like I might have before, I listened, really listened. He's doing better now, and the whole unit is stronger for it." The afternoon focused on structuring the national program. Caleb drew from his own experiences, both military and personal, to create exercises that would challenge traditional notions of leadership while respecting military discipline. "Compassion isn't weakness," he told the group as they refined the training modules. "It's the foundation of true strength. When we understand that, we can build teams that don't just endure, they thrive." At 4 o'clock, Caleb received another text from Eli. "Started writing about you in my journal. Teacher says it's powerful stuff. Can I read it to you tonight?" "Wouldn't miss it for anything," Caleb replied, feeling a surge of pride. The work continued until early evening. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the Pentagon's windows, Caleb gathered his materials. The day's progress exceeded his expectations, not just in terms of the curriculum development, but in witnessing how deeply his message had already taken root. Back in his hotel room, Caleb spread the day's work across the desk. The program was taking shape, a comprehensive approach to building resilient leaders through emotional intelligence, moral courage, and genuine human connection. It wasn't just about preventing breakdowns or managing stress. It was about fostering growth through understanding and support. His laptop chimed with an incoming video call from Eli. Caleb clicked to answer and his son's face filled the screen, looking energized despite the late hour. "Dad, wait till you hear what I wrote." Eli held up his journal, excitement clear in his voice. "It's about how you taught me that asking for help isn't weakness. It's actually really brave." As Eli read his entry aloud, Caleb listened intently, moved by his son's insights. The journal entry captured their journey together, highlighting how they'd both grown stronger by learning to lean on their community and each other. After saying goodnight to Eli, Caleb returned to reviewing the program drafts. The papers spread before him represented more than just a training curriculum. They were a roadmap for transformation, both for the military and for the individuals within it. He picked up a document titled Core Principles and read through the points they'd refined today. Looking at these principles, Caleb felt profound gratitude. Just weeks ago, he'd thought his career and his sense of purpose were over. Now, here he was, helping shape the future of military leadership, all while growing closer to his son. He carefully organized the papers into his briefcase, ready for tomorrow's sessions. The hotel room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning, but Caleb's mind was full of the day's voices, the enthusiastic discussions, the shared insights, and most importantly, his son's proud words. As he prepared for bed, Caleb noticed a handwritten note that had slipped from one of the folders. It was from Sergeant Torres. "Your story inspired us, Mr. Morgan, but it's your humanity that taught us. Thank you for showing us what real strength looks like." The late afternoon sun painted the National Veterans Memorial in warm golden light, casting long shadows across the manicured grounds where hundreds of white folding chairs had been arranged in precise rows. The chairs faced a simple wooden podium that stood beneath fluttering American flags, their red, white, and blue fabric dancing in the gentle breeze. The seats were filled with a remarkable mix of dress uniforms adorned with ribbons and medals, casual civilian clothes, and everything in between. Veterans of all ages had gathered alongside families, community leaders, and curious townspeople who had made the journey to witness this historic moment. Caleb sat on the stage in a metal folding chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, as General Ellery stood at the podium making the introductions. The general's voice carried clearly across the gathering, but Caleb found it difficult to focus on the words. His heart hammered against his ribs, and his palms felt damp despite the cool autumn air. He had faced down explosive devices under enemy fire, but somehow this moment felt more terrifying than any battlefield he had ever known. The crowd stretched far beyond the neat rows of chairs. Veterans leaning heavily on wooden canes or metal walkers had positioned themselves along the memorial's walkways, their weathered faces turned toward the stage with expressions of quiet respect. Young soldiers in crisp uniforms stood at parade rest near the back, their posture perfect but their eyes warm with curiosity. Townspeople who had driven hours to show their support clustered in small groups, some holding handmade signs with messages of encouragement. In the front row, directly in Caleb's line of sight, Eli sat tall and straight in his chair. The fading bruises on his face were barely visible now, reduced to pale yellow shadows that would soon disappear completely. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore the navy blue button-down shirt that Caleb had ironed carefully that morning. His eyes shone with unmistakable pride as he watched his father, and every few moments he would offer an encouraging nod or a small smile that seemed to say, "You've got this, Dad." When General Ellery called his name, Caleb rose slowly from his chair. His legs felt unsteady beneath him, but he managed to walk the few steps to the podium without stumbling. He adjusted the microphone with trembling fingers, the small mechanical sound echoing across the memorial grounds. Looking out over the sea of faces, he felt his throat constrict with emotion. Hundreds of pairs of eyes watched him expectantly, waiting for words of wisdom from a man who still sometimes struggled to believe he had anything valuable to offer. Then his gaze found Eli's face in the front row. His son's encouraging smile was like a warm hand on his shoulder, steadying him and reminding him of all the reasons he was standing there. The tightness in his chest began to ease, and the words that had seemed so elusive suddenly began to flow. "When I was younger," Caleb began, his voice soft but surprisingly clear as it carried across the memorial, "I thought heroism meant running into danger without hesitation, dismantling bombs under enemy fire, saving lives in those dramatic moments that make headlines and earn medals." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the diverse gathering before him. Veterans nodded in recognition, understanding exactly what he meant. "But life has taught me something different. Life has shown me that true courage often looks much quieter than that, much more ordinary on the surface." A gentle breeze rustled through the memorial's flags, creating a soft whisper of fabric that seemed to punctuate his words. The afternoon sun continued its slow descent, painting everything in that magical golden hour light that photographers dream about. Caleb felt some of his nervousness fade as he settled into the rhythm of speaking, his voice growing more confident with each sentence. "Real heroism," he continued, "is the single parent working 2 jobs to keep food on the table, coming home exhausted but still helping with homework. It's the veteran fighting invisible battles long after coming home, struggling with memories that won't fade but still showing up for family and community. It's the teenager who faces down cruelty and bullying with dignity intact, who chooses kindness even when the world seems determined to make them bitter." His eyes met Eli's briefly, and he saw his son's chin lift with quiet pride. "It's everyone who gets back up when the world tries to convince them they're not enough. They're too old. They're disposable." Near the back of the crowd, partially hidden behind one of the memorial's white stone pillars, stood Dan Huxley. The factory supervisor had arrived late, slipping into the gathering without fanfare or announcement. His usual swagger was completely gone, replaced by an uncertain shifting from foot to foot, as he listened to words that seemed to cut straight through his defensive armor. His weathered face showed the dawning recognition of how terribly wrong he had been about the man he had once dismissed as a washed-up old-timer. The shame was visible in the way his shoulders sagged, the way his eyes couldn't quite meet the stage. "We talk about sacrifice in terms of dramatic moments," Caleb said, his voice growing stronger and more passionate with each word. "The ultimate sacrifice, the heroic last stand, the moment of glory that gets remembered in history books. But sometimes the greatest sacrifice is simply showing up every day, doing what needs to be done, even when no one sees or understands the effort it takes. It's carrying on when everything feels impossible, when the bills pile up and the boss treats you like you're worthless and the kids at school make your child's life miserable." He gripped the edges of the podium gently, his knuckles showing white for just a moment. "And most importantly, it's reaching out to others when they're struggling, even if we're struggling ourselves. It's choosing to see the value in people that society wants to throw away." In the audience, scattered throughout the crowd like seeds of strength, sat several of the veterans who had brought groceries and support during Caleb's darkest days after the factory incident. Old Frank, with his Korean war cap, sat 3 rows back, nodding slowly. Maria from the VA office had taken time off work to attend, her nurse's uniform traded for a simple blue dress. Tom, whose arthritis made every movement painful, had positioned his wheelchair near the aisle where he could see clearly. Their presence formed an invisible web of connection and strength that seemed to emanate outward through the entire gathering. "I stand here today," Caleb continued, his voice now carrying the confidence of a man who had finally found his purpose, Not because I'm special or extraordinary, but because people believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. They saw value where others saw only weakness and age. They understood that growing older isn't a liability to be managed or a problem to be solved. It's a repository of wisdom earned through years of quiet perseverance, of getting knocked down and getting back up, of learning that real strength often comes disguised as gentleness. General Ellery listened from his seat on stage, his weathered face showing deep approval and something that looked very much like paternal pride. He had seen Caleb's classified files, knew about the lives saved and the impossible missions completed under fire, but he also understood that the man standing at the podium had accomplished something even more remarkable in the months since leaving the factory. He had transformed pain into purpose, isolation into connection, despair into hope. The soldiers from the new training program sat at perfect attention in a block of seats near the middle, their posture reflecting both military discipline and genuine affection for their unlikely mentor, who had taught them that leadership meant serving others, not commanding them. This new initiative, Caleb explained, his voice warm with conviction and excitement, isn't just about military leadership or training programs or government policies. It's about recognizing the hero in every person who chooses kindness over cruelty, who lifts others up instead of pushing them down when they're struggling. It's about understanding that true strength often comes wrapped in gentleness, that wisdom often speaks quietly, and that the people society overlooks might be exactly the ones we need most. As he spoke, Eli sat straighter in his front row seat, his chin lifting with each word. The speech seemed to wash away the last lingering shadows of fear and shame from his young face, replacing them with something that looked remarkably like hope. Around him, people throughout the crowd dabbed at their eyes with tissues or nodded in recognition of truths they had always known in their hearts but rarely heard spoken aloud with such clarity and conviction. The memorial grounds had grown completely quiet except for Caleb's voice and the gentle rustling of flags in the breeze. Even the birds seemed to have paused their evening songs to listen. The golden afternoon light continued to shift and change, painting everything in warm honey tones that made the moment feel almost dreamlike in its beauty and significance. When Caleb finished speaking, stepping back from the podium with a small nod of completion, the silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then the applause began. Slowly at first, just a few people clapping, but it quickly built to a thunderous crescendo that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. People rose from their chairs in a standing ovation that went on, the sound rolling across the memorial like waves against a shore. General Ellery approached the podium carrying an elegant leather folder containing Caleb's official appointment documents. The general's handshake was firm and warm, his smile genuine as he presented the folder that would formally launch the National Moral Leadership Initiative. The crowd's applause continued as photographers captured the moment for posterity. But Caleb barely noticed the cameras. His attention was focused on the faces in the audience. Veterans who understood sacrifice, young people who needed hope, families who had struggled and endured. After the ceremony concluded and the formal presentations were complete, as the crowd began to slowly disperse into the gathering dusk, Caleb found Eli waiting at the bottom of the stage steps. His son's face glowed with pride and something else. A confidence that hadn't been there before, a sense of belonging to something larger than himself. Without words, they fell into step together, walking away from the podium and the lingering groups of well-wishers toward the memorial's reflecting pool. The setting sun painted the water in brilliant shades of orange and gold, their reflections walking beside them like echoes of infinite possibility. The pool was perfectly still, its surface like polished glass that captured not just their images but the entire sky above, creating a world within a world where earth and heaven seemed to meet. They stopped at the pool's edge, their hands finding each other naturally. The water rippled gently from the evening breeze, catching the last rays of daylight and scattering them in dancing patterns across the surface. In the distance, they could hear the gentle conversations of people making their way back to cars and buses, but here by the water, they might as well have been alone in the universe. "You know, Eli," Caleb said softly, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying perfectly in the still air, "there's something I've learned through all of this, through losing the job, through the fear and the shame, through finding my way back to purpose." He squeezed his son's hand gently, feeling the strength in those young fingers. "No matter what anyone says, No matter how the world tries to convince us otherwise, no one is ever useless. Every life, no matter how quiet or ordinary it seems, is meant for some kind of greatness. It might not be the kind that gets written about in newspapers or remembered in history books, but it's real and it matters. Eli leaned against his father's shoulder, their reflections merging in the golden water before them like two souls becoming one. The evening air was sweet with the scent of blooming cherry trees that lined the memorial's pathways, and somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird called out its evening song, a complex melody that seemed to contain echoes of every beautiful sound it had ever heard. In that moment, standing together at the edge of the reflecting pool with the memorial's flags rustling softly behind them, they were exactly where they needed to be. Two hearts bound by unshakable love, walking forward into tomorrow's light with the confidence that comes from knowing you are valued, you are enough, you belong in this world. The challenges weren't over. There would still be difficult days, still be moments of doubt and struggle, but they would face them together, supported by a community that had chosen to see their worth when they couldn't see it themselves. Around them, the memorial grounds grew peaceful as the sun continued its descent, painting the sky in brilliant shades of promise that stretched from horizon to horizon. The gentle ripples in the reflecting pool caught the changing light, transforming ordinary water into liquid gold, much like how life's unexpected challenges had transformed their ordinary days into something precious and rare, something worth celebrating and remembering for years to come. In the growing twilight, father and son stood together in comfortable silence, their reflections shimmering in the golden water like a promise that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to make a difference, to choose love over fear, to be the heroes their community needed them to be. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Caleb Morgan, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.